Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to this channel. My name is Captain Dra, and this is the Army of Smart People. I'm grateful that I get another chance to talk to you people. I'm grateful that I get another chance to do what I think we should be doing and what should have been done from the word go. Our people need to be empowered, our people need to be educated, and our people need to be informed about the issues that are affecting them on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that irritates me the most is when I see a country of people who speak with a lot of confidence from a place of lack of knowledge, from a place of lack of information. And the unfortunate bit is that then it's not like the information is not available. The information is very much available. We just choose to speak from a place of ignorance. Our founding father once said that the biggest challenge that Kenya is facing as a country is poverty, ignorance, and diseases. And it is unfortunate that to this date, we still haven't dealt with ignorance, despite the enormous and tremendous progress that have been made towards availing information. Before I knew what I know now, I used to think that there is not enough information provided by the necessary institutions like, of course, the government institutions, the private sector and all that. But the world that we live right now, guys, anything you want to know about what is happening in your country, trust me, you will know. Because you just need to look in the right places and you add your 1 plus 1s and you will get your answers. Having said that, whatever I give out of this channel is not everything. This is just a noble Kenyan taking his time to study and look around what is happening in the country, to try and collect as much information as possible and to speak it out, hoping that one person or two will be impacted. I'm open to discussions. I'm open to my fellow smart people sharing what they know and giving me a piece of their mind, because that is what we are about. And I look forward to one day engaging with you at a more deeper level, constructively, productively, and in a forward-looking kind of manner. Now today I want to ask you guys to drop your political honors and let's deconstruct something that we should have done a while back, but now we have a chance. Before we even got to where we are right now, there was something called the budget. The budget making process is one of the most important stages in a government calendar, because the budget determines the specific areas allocation of resources is going to be done. It can also tell you whether the strategy being implemented by a government is right or wrong. It can even give you insight into the potential corruption areas. You can always tell a budgetary item that is specifically put in place for the purposes of corruption. Unfortunately, in our country, it is normally left to become like a normal process. A lot of people don't really deconstruct the budget the way it should. And I also think it is normally done very quickly, and therefore we really don't get the time to understand it in detail. And to be fair, a lot of that information is normally very complex. Yeah, for a normal mwananchi, it's a bit complex. Let's not overestimate our abilities to read some of these government documents in details. But thanks to the progress we've made so far, the ministry the treasury ministry has done tremendously in trying to come up with watered down kind of summaries for a normal mwananchi to be able to understand the budget. So today I came across a document that is called the Kenyan Budget Mwananchi Guidelines. So they have just broken it down they have summarized it in a way a normal mwananchi can understand. And I am also a normal mwananchi, I would want to presume. So therefore, before we understand why the current government came up with that budget, may I first of all tell you this. If I was to look at Kenya as a country right now and to ask myself, what will be the ideal country that Kenya should be? What do we really need now as a country? What will make Kenya a good place to live, a good place to work, and what will make us feel like the country is moving in the right direction? The only good thing to happen to a developing country should always be that the people are able to access basic human needs. And after they have accessed basic human needs, can they offer those basic human needs to their children? Can people eat? Can people have a place to sleep and to live? And can people access good healthcare? And the next step after I have looked into that is, can people take care of the future? Are we able to find hope in the fact that we've saved something out of what we have made? So the true measure of a country that is moving forward is, how much progress have you made in providing your people with basic needs and then giving them hope for the future, in the sense that they can sit or they can work knowing that they have secured a bit of their future through something called savings. For those people who have done a bit of economics, you will understand that there is a function called economic growth function or economic development function. The basic driver of economic growth and economic development is something called savings and investments. For a country to grow and for a country to develop, fundamentally, that country has to save, aggregate savings, and that country has to have real investments. Now, how can a country have investments or savings if the people cannot generate an income? It is not possible. And that is why any person who comes on board to lead a developing country like Kenya, his first conversation should be, how can I make people to generate an income? How can people be able to make money so that they can afford their basic needs and leave something for saving and something for investments? Because that is what drives a country into development. But as well, it is not enough for you to generate an income and to put savings away. Because remember, if you can make an income and if you can put savings away, but the rate of inflation is very high, the rate at which that money is losing value is very high, then you are eating away into the efforts that you've put in place to secure the future. And that means that people will not be able to still afford the basic needs a few years from now if the inflation is very high. Therefore, a good working government must take care of inflation. It must make sure that people are making money in the first place, that there is money that people are generating out of productive labor. And once they make money, these people should be able to save something out of that. And once they save, then that money needs to be protected. People do not need to lose the value of their money that they have put away for savings as a result of inflation. Any government that is speaking to you beyond those things has, I must say from where I sit, that they're having their priorities wrong. The development that should be directed to a developing country should be development geared towards providing basic amenities, housing, education, food, clothing, health. So before now, if you now go into the budget making process, you ask yourself, how serious is the current government taking those things into consideration? That is where the conversation should begin. People who are hungry do not understand conversations about the future, innovation. They don't understand about where the world is moving towards. You cannot speak to people about technology when someone does not have food in their stomach. You cannot speak to people about the digital world or the new way of doing things, or what the first world country is doing, or what the middle income countries are doing when these people are sleeping in the cold, or when these people don't know where the next rent is going to come from. Feed people first, provide people with housing, keep them safe. Then they will start dreaming. Now, while I understand that should be the process, we live in a real world where everything is being done at the same time, which is fair enough. Of course, you cannot get stuck into a place of trying to elevate people without also catching up with the world, because the world is moving very fast and you have to keep up to some degree. So therefore, having made that clarification, let's now go into understanding what is the makeup of the strategy that the current government was trying to do for them to promise Kenyans that they are going to take us to the next level. When this regime was campaigning, what they did was to say that they are going to apply something called a bottom-up model. How many Kenyans really know what bottom-up model means? I remember during the campaigns, even the politicians who are pro bottom-up model could not explain in detail what bottom-up is. And to this day, as you're listening to me, do you know what bottom-ups mean? Do you know what that model means? Now, let me just put a bit of information in our heads. There are very, very many approaches to economic models. Anytime you hear of an economic model, what someone is talking about is allocation of scarce resources. Allocation of scarce resources. An economic model just looks at what is the approach you are using to allocate the scarce resources. Because remember, there are many people in the world or in a country who have varied needs. We have very, very many needs. But the resources we have are limited. And therefore, that art of trying to figure out how to allocate those resources is what is called economics. And therefore, people have different models that they apply. Some people believe that resources should be taken to people who have the factors of production. People who have land, people who own houses, they are called the landlords. That everyone should be aspiring to become a landlord, and therefore resources should be directed to those people who own units of production. The bottom-up economic model basically says this. It is trying to correct the problems that the existing system has created. The existing system of landlords has created something called inequality, where we have a very big gap between those people who have money and those people who don't have money. So the current leadership says or thinks that before we even proceed, we need to bridge this gap. And for sure, that is a well-known need. It's a well-known need that we need to bridge the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Because for as long as that gap is widening, then Kenya will not achieve its economic goals. It is not healthy for a country to have very, very large inequality gaps. Because at one point, the rich will be at risk from the poor. Therefore, different people have different ways of bridging the gap between the rich and the poor. And that is where some people encourage the rich to drive the agenda. You find ways in which the rich can drive the agenda. But in this case, the government of Kenya, the present government of Kenya is saying that they are going to try and bridge that gap by starting from the poor to the rich. As expected, it's not going to be a very smooth process because the rich cannot allow that to happen, or they are not comfortable with that happening because they like or they enjoy the present existing structure. So our current government model is what is called the bottom-up model. They are going to start from the poor going to the rich. But how are they going to do that? By making sure that they address the reasons which make the poor people to be where they are. Some of the issues are things like employment, that they're going to create jobs for these people. They're going to put money into people's hands through credit, cheap credit. They are going to create opportunities for the poor to supply resources or to supply inputs to the housing projects so that the poor can directly get employment into housing, and they can also provide resources for building the houses. They're also saying they're going to create digital jobs where poor people can also earn something from the digital superhighway, as they call it, rather than just get used to doing manual labor. Now, to the extent that this can be successful is what we are waiting to see, because this is their model. And that was me trying to just break it down to you simply. Having understood that, that is where something called the bottom-up economic transformation agenda came up. So if you're listening to me, the model that the current government is implementing is called BETA. If you've heard of BETA, it's basically bottom-up economic transformation agenda, which they are relying on to make decisions going forward in terms of now allocation of resources and even how they are going to finance the budget. They are very hopeful that 2024-2025 is going to be like a stable season. And a stable season in the sense that the services sector in Kenya is going to be very strong, and agriculture is going to be to stabilize, and all this they're expecting to happen because the global prices have declined and they have also stabilized. Kenya has a very strong services industry. Kenya as an economy is slowly transitioning from agriculture into the services industry. It is not yet there. Agriculture is still the largest income earner in the country. But the recent trajectory is showing that the services sector in Kenya is moving and is coming on very strongly. And it makes a lot of sense considering that Kenya is not a natural, is not very very much endowed with natural resources as the rest of the countries. And we are here by design. We have found ourselves here by design and also by adaptation. We are trying to adapt to what we have. Yeah. So 2024-2025 is expected to be a very stable economic year. And we have come so far to a place where inflation, which I told you, remember what I told you, that a good government must ensure inflation is kept at a low. So inflation is expected to be at around 5%. 5% inflation is still, while it is good comparatively to the rest of the world, it is still high when compared to the ideal. Countries like the US, country like Japan, country like China, they manage to keep the inflation rates to below 3%, 2%. Now, while I understand they are very stable economies, I am just trying to give you an insight into what an ideal inflationary rates should be like. So, but considering we are coming from a place where it was at one point headed to 10% in the year 2022-2023, 5% inflation is good enough for now. Also, the Kenya shillings has stabilized, and that is basically because the perception that people had back in February about the Kenya shillings has somehow changed. There was a big fear that Kenya might not be able to repay its debt to the Eurobond that was falling due. But because that whole thing was de-risked, or the government found a way around it, the market perception quickly changed and people started having or gaining confidence back into the Kenya shillings. And therefore, the Kenya shillings has pretty much stabilized over the course of the last few months. It is therefore projected to still stabilize going forward. And also, this bottom-up transformation agenda, it is geared towards driving public debt down. So what they're saying is, while they're expecting inflation to be very stable, they're also expecting the Kenya shillings to be very stable against the international currencies. They are also trying as much as possible to drive down this thing called public debt. If you've watched the previous video that I did, I had mentioned to you that 30% of our income, the 30% of our budget as a government or as a country is normally geared towards repaying interest on loans. It is a huge component of our budget. And therefore, a good president who is thinking about his people or the country must be working towards finding ways of managing debt. The first step of managing debt is to try and reduce the deficit. You see that deficit that is there in your budget. I know some people could be listening to me, but they don't understand what deficits in budgets mean. So the Kenyan budget was 3.9 trillion, but the Kenyan government can only raise 3.3 trillion from internally, from KRA. Yeah. So this difference of 600 billion, where is it supposed to come from? Normally they borrow. So the first step for you to avoid or to reduce the burden of debt is to make sure that this difference of around 600 billion, how do you reduce it so that it gets to a point where we will be doing budgets and we have a deficit of like maybe 200 billion or maybe 100 billion. So it's one of the pillars for the bottom-up transformation agenda. And they're trying to reduce it from the present one, which is around 5.7% of our GDP, to around 3.1% of our GDP. These things, I hope they don't sound too complex. I'm trying to be as simple in my conversations as possible. So the point I've just made right now is to give you an insight into what the current regime is pegging, or the pillar on which it is pegging its transformation or growth or development agenda. It is called bottom-up economic transformation agenda, which is meant to empower the bottom sector of the economy, or the bottom end of the economy, so that the bottom end of the economy can be the one driving growth and development. I must confess that I don't yet understand why this thing was not very clear and people were confusing it. And there was a lot of confusion around it, because to me, it is clear from a concept point of view. Maybe the operationalization side of it is where there was a challenge and where most people were not getting what this point means. And I can clarify on that. What does it mean to drive an economy from the bottom up? Economies are driven by expenditure, people spending money. So if the bottom end of the economy, people don't have money, so they won't spend. And if they don't spend, businesses won't sell. And if businesses don't sell, manufacturers won't produce. And if manufacturers don't produce, then it means the aggregate output, the output of the country will not grow. Productivity, how much has been produced in an economy, will not grow as a result of that. So if you want this bottom end of the economy to spend, you put money into their pockets. How do you put money into their pockets? You give them meaningful employment opportunities, or you catalyze the process of them making money. Now, since the only legal way through which you can put money into these people's pockets is to create employment. But remember, the government is only an enabler of the economy. The government does not go out to do investments that are supposed to trigger development. The government is supposed to enable the economy so that the investors can invest and therefore create opportunities for the bottom end. But now the difference here is that the government is going to allocate some funds in its budget to specific areas that will trigger opportunities, or will trigger activity that is going to create an opportunity for this bottom end of the economy. And to be specific, that is why when you look at the budget that this government did, they identified specific areas which they are going to now budget and put money in. They identified agriculture, and agriculture remains a very significant sector in our economy, because most of us rely on agriculture for survival. Then they identified micro, small and medium enterprises, then housing settlement, healthcare, and finally digital superhighway and creative industry as the specific areas that they are going to drive their bottom-up economic model through. So if you want to know the specific areas that they were pushing money into, or they have budgeted to push money into, and this is for those also who are planning to do investment or to look for business opportunities, The government is the biggest spender of an economy, and therefore wherever it is that they take money, they are creating opportunities in those spaces. So they are pushing money into leather and leather products. So those are opportunities you can start the business in. They're also putting money into textile apparel. They're putting money into dairy, edible oils, tea, rice, blue economy, natural resources, construction and building. And this is a very significant, important point, guys. If the government is driving the agenda through bottom-up economic transformation model, and they have identified specific areas they're going to budget or to allocate resources to, that is where opportunities therefore lie. And as a Kenyan, as you're thinking of places to invest, then look at those places, because that is where the money will be moving. It doesn't matter whether those monies will go there through corruption, or what matters is that money will get into those kind of spaces. And you can already start looking at places where you can invest. Now, if I look at this bottom-up economic model, it represents and shows something that is close to actually the ideal or what should be happening in our country. And I think that's what this president used when he was campaigning, to really convince people that he was the right man for the job. Because if you understand this model very well, it is quite convincing. The only problem comes in to now the implementation. And I think most Kenyans, where our problem is coming from, is at the implementation level. Because I don't think most Kenyans took their time to understand the bottom-up economic model. The only point where they have come in is at the point of saying, we are not satisfied by what you as a president is doing. And I agree. The only thing I will say is that I don't think the president is getting it wrong from the policy and from the design perspective. I think he's getting it wrong from the execution and the implementation, because of the usual suspects: corruption, the usual problems that most developing countries face, corruption. And therefore, at least I know for now that you now understand what a bottom-up economic model is and what the strategy of the present leadership is trying to achieve. When we come back next, there's a lot to talk about, guys. There's a lot to talk about, and I have a lot to talk about. Sometimes I just wish that I could talk on and on and on. But the attention span for human beings is not very long, so I'll try and make these conversations very short. Allow me to leave it at that. And when we come back, we are now going to compare how this budget looks like compared to what Uhuru Kenyatta had, so that we see, was President Ruto right to adjust the budget in his first year as president, and how did it change, and why did he have to change it? And also, based on the corruption cases that we've had so far, are those corruption cases directly related to the specific areas that the current president allocated more money? The changes that he made to the budget, did we see those changes creating opportunities for people to steal? And therefore, those are the cases that have been happening within the country in the past few months. Now, this is a conversation that will keep going. And like I said, a lot of it is informed by information that I get from publicly available data, and then I give you my view. You are open and allowed to disagree and agree. The most important thing is that we remain constructive and we build each other as we continue on with these discussions. For those who have joined us for the first time, thank you so much for listening to me, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with you on this very amazing platform and channel called Channel Ask Dra. That has been my time. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Thank you.